The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Jillian Schaefer and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, How to Accelerate and Secure In-House Business Applications, presented by Eric Rupert of SWK Technologies. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise down. However, you can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar. To submit a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this presentation, and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees as well as to those who registered but were not able to attend. Please take a moment during the presentation to answer our one poll question. With that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend our webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing you software and industry knowledge, tools, and support whenever you need it. So whether you're here doing research for a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions throughout the webinar. Lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels, so we encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Eric.
Thank you so much, Jolene. So today we'll be talking about how to accelerate and secure your in-house business applications. As we come through this presentation, we'll get started with an agenda just to go over the high-level overview of each of the topics we're looking to touch on today. We'll explain some underlying business technology as a baseline for everyone to get started. We'll dive into a bit of the market, and then we'll focus on the performance and security of both your on-premise and or cloud workloads, and make sure that we understand what works best for you and provide assistance where we can. Any questions or additions, as Jolene had mentioned, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. My name is Eric Rupert, Senior Solution Architect here at SWK. If you have any questions after the webinar, always feel free to send an email over to me, and I'll be happy to reach back out and get started. Quick overview on SWK Technologies. We're a nationally recognized MSP and solution provider in North America. We have nationwide coverage leveraging our over 170 employees. And now that we have that administrative stuff out of the way, we'll jump into some of the stuff that actually runs your business on the back end. This might be a bit high level for the IT people on the call, but it lays that foundation of technology that keeps all of your programs running. As noted here, everything starts with the user access that we're foundationally using. So those workstations, mobile devices, everything that really needs to get into your business applications. And we'll be focused on securing and managing the individual to ensure that all of the business risk is mitigated while focusing on usability, keeping yourselves and your employees productive. So how do we get there? It all starts with networking technology. So ensuring that we have connectivity, access, and management, and that your users are able to talk to each other and to the technology that runs your business on the back end. This is leveraging VPN solutions, wireless access points, switches, and routers. And then we jump into the actual technology that runs your applications. So servers that do the thinking and are core to ensuring that your users have a good experience, and storage that ensures the access to things like files and SQL databases are all speedy and efficient and create that major pillar of performance on the back end. And at the heart of it all, we layer on security to mitigate risk for your businesses. And we make sure that we have a high-level picture of what your technology might look like. We also want to dive into understanding the cloud so that we can understand where performance is going in the future. So essentially, we can take all of that infrastructure we just spoke about, move it into someone else's building, such as AWS, SWK, Amazon. They manage it, they secure it, they power it and configure it, make sure it's upgraded for security, and they leverage the economies of scale to keep high performance equipment in-house and then virtualize it to ensure that customers have individual pieces that are very powerful and able to do what they need to run your applications. How does that help you? Well, it can allow cloud providers to take that risk off of your hands. It takes the upfront cost away and it guarantees performance and uptime or your money back. So it allows you to leverage infrastructure more like an Uber inside of a city. You get what you need when you need it, and you let someone else kind of handle the maintenance of that machine. So what doesn't cloud do? It doesn't really provide a reduction in price up front, especially when we compare it to equipment that you could put inside of your infrastructure today. So as we look at that reduction in price, what we do see a reduce in is your administrative time, having to build out server rooms, needing to power this equipment and troubleshoot problems inside of the equipment. What it can do is allow you to size your infrastructure for the now and add for growth very quickly. We'll touch more on this in a bit, but it also doesn't offload compliance. So if you have any compliance requirements inside of your organization, you still need to maintain those, and moving into the cloud definitely doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of effort. Depends completely on your environment. You might need to migrate traditional systems into the cloud. It adds a variable cost that you might have to absorb and maintain. And then you do need to manage that change for all of your users and employees. As you move in, executives have to be available for buy-in and support of that migration, as it's costly and has a huge disruption on the actual business itself. And there needs to be a clear vision of what the cloud can and cannot do for you. So as we move to a more cloud-focused world, you can see a massive performance reward when you're implementing correctly, but you have to make sure that that's in the cards for you. So why are we talking about cloud? Well, that's really where the market is going. 43% of small and medium businesses today have workloads that are 100% in the cloud, and that number's from before the COVID pandemic. Does this mean that there's no need for on-premise equipment at all? No, definitely not. There's always going to be that need for some businesses, but we want to understand what works for your business specifically. You need to evaluate, understand your tolerance for change, and have a clear understanding of the improvements and savings that could be associated with that change. Most businesses today are already paying for G Suite or Office 365 and severely underleveraging those capabilities. Things like SharePoint, Google Drive, and the security suites that are layered on top of these platforms are very, very underutilized and definitely not being seen as the value drivers that they have. So with the market being all in on the cloud, you definitely want to make sure what's right for you and for your business as we move forward. So understanding where it's right, there's no real perfect formula. You need to see how old is your stuff that you have on site. Are you ready for a refresh, or does it have multiple years left in its ability and its capacity? Do you have large legacy monolithic custom built applications that just aren't designed for the cloud? You're probably looking at a high migration expense, a high ongoing running cost for those, and you might be better served in-house for those large custom built applications. Another piece to consider is, do you have an IT staff today? Are they really working to keep the lights on all day, or are they working on strategic initiatives and the servers are just running themselves? It might make sense if all of their day is focused on really maintaining aging and legacy equipment to move those workloads into someone else's problem essentially, and ensure that your staff have that ability to drive strategic initiatives instead of being stuck on what is essentially tier 1 help desk. Do you need low latency inside of your applications? Things like AutoCAD and design software, professional photo and media editing. Typically, we still see most organizations sitting on premise for those types of workloads today. And finally, Are you in rapid growth mode as a company? Are you adding on users monthly, weekly, daily? If that's the case, you probably need a little more flexibility than actually putting stuff into a room on site can handle. So having the flexibility of the cloud can be crucial for organizations in that boat. And now that we've beat the cloud horse to death, let's talk about performance and security as it pertains to your environments. So what is the cost of security? Typically, security can be a little bit of a polar opposite compared to performance. You might accidentally reduce the productivity of your users by adding barriers to work. You could reduce the speed of your systems by putting too much security monitoring and mitigating risk factors into place to make sure that users aren't accidentally downloading viruses. That can be pretty costly from a performance perspective. So how do we balance that? It's really a case-by-case business decision. Sometimes you can increase costs and improve your security and speed, but the costs have diminishing returns. So you want to make sure that you're offloading that security into either your network or into your applications where you can, so that your user machines and your user costs don't increase while also reducing productivity. So how do we ensure that that security is where it needs to be? It's really about being active in your security approach. It's not a passive solution inside of technology. Passive security solutions have their place, but the plan needs to include active mitigating controls, and you need to prevent issues on the upfront to make sure that your environment isn't breached and it isn't a target of ransomware. It might take time up front, it might have costs associated, but remediation and investigation of a ransomware can be cost prohibitive for even very, very well-to-do companies. So definitely something to keep on mind. Diving a little more into what can actually slow down the performance of your on-premise equipment. I have some stuff here shown on this slide. Don't want to read at you, so I'll just high-level overview. Every step of the equipment journey has its hangups. It has its potential pitfalls from that first slide that we were evaluating. You've heard of some of these things probably. Poor application design, not having enough memory on your PC or your servers. But there's other things that are a little more technical that might not be inside of your wheelhouse. You might have improper RAID configured on your storage systems, or you have oversubscribed CPUs in a virtualized environment. Some examples of recent things that I've seen in my days. So just recently, we had a critical issue come up on shared resources on one of our SQL servers. We had multiple databases sitting inside of a database server. One had started taking the lion's share as the application began to scale up and scale out. And because there was no mitigating factors put into place to prevent that server from taking the lion's share of resources, the other servers had been left by the wayside. Wasn't something that was intentional. It wasn't easy to identify. We had to dive into log files, error messages, and all kinds of diagnostic traces. But once we had the cause in hand and we knew what was going on, we were able to put guardrails around that struggling, or the server that was kind of taking all of the lion's share of resources, and allow the other servers to get their piece of the pie. Other things that I see day to day are aging infrastructure, aging networks. So you have very old wireless technology sitting in some buildings, and you can see that those wireless infrastructure pieces having one by one multi-user, multi-input. So you end up with only one person being able to use your Wi-Fi at a time without throttling for network resources, essentially. And that happens across the board. Now that we're inside of a COVID world, wireless becomes a little less important to some people as everyone's working from home, but that has its own challenges. And the number one reason that we see really creating problems inside of on-premise businesses is just an overarching layer of complexity that comes from a business growing with their infrastructure. Sometimes you need to add on new things to an already existing system, and the only way to do that is complex. So through simplifying some of those systems, you can typically see pretty impressive improvements in performance. Move on to really understand what slows down the cloud instead of just what slows down your on-premise equipment, because the cloud has its own pitfalls. It faces very different challenges because the equipment itself is typically either brand new or very recently implemented. The cloud is newer than most people's on-premise equipment. So as we come through, businesses typically move their applications directly into the cloud. People who were on the cutting edge of the cloud adoption took what was traditionally a very on-premise workload, something that's monolithic, and moved it directly into a cloud provider like Amazon or AWS. These applications then struggle because that cloud infrastructure, that shared public infrastructure, just isn't designed for handling that type of workload. It's a booming industry to redesign legacy applications into a public cloud design that enables you to take advantage of things like serverless infrastructure. Many of the same issues that are faced in on-premise are sometimes faced inside of the cloud. You just don't have the right type of storage, or you don't have enough processors or memory associated to your systems. The difference is you don't have to buy an entirely new storage system or hard drives or processors in order to get that system migrated and those issues resolved. You can just stand up a new server inside of someone else's world. One of the biggest things that we see is people who are putting security solutions designed for on-premise equipment into a cloud environment. So cloud environments typically have security layers baked in or on top of them so that you can take advantage of security-driven APIs to pull out data and watch it for traffic patterns and other indicators of compromise and problems to prevent that security issue from being a much bigger incident inside of your world. And finally, we see the internet connections at people's houses as being the number one problem inside of a cloud-focused world. People have outdated or slow residential internet. Cable companies or DSL in some areas of the country just end up being a true issue for the more rural communities that we see, especially now that work from home is part of the new normal. So with that out of the way, how SWK can help, we're definitely available here if you need anybody for either IT consulting or services, and we can definitely provide any of the services that we show here on the slide. So if you have any questions, this would be the time to throw them in the chat, and we'll get right into our poll questions as Jolene takes back over.
Thanks, Eric. We'll now open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please enter them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar. And while we're waiting for that to come in, I'll launch the poll. And it does look like there were a few questions that came in during the presentation, Eric. The first being, our system is running slow and we're having a hard time figuring out why. How would you troubleshoot a slow ERP system?
Of course. So inside of a slow ERP system, we'd probably start from the bottom up. We really want to verify that all the systems and those pieces that we talked about earlier in the presentation are sufficient to handle that workload that we're asking of it. ERP systems can be complex and are spanning a lot of different solutions. So once we understand clearly where the issue is coming from, digging into those logs, we would be able to try any mitigating factors that typically help inside of those performance issues. And then if that doesn't work, we would likely need to procure either better hardware or resources just to increase that performance in some way.
And we have another. What kind of tools and services exist for evaluating security for our existing solutions?
Sure. So there's a lot of potential solutions to evaluating security as it exists today. One of the bigger ways that we see it coming through is going to be a network-based security evaluation. So we'll see we place a security appliance at the edge of a network or a system, and we see what kinds of threats and issues are coming through that pipe to the servers that we're working with. And once we have that understood, we can make a remediation plan and lock down some of the more glaring issues. So there are also active threat mitigation solutions that we could take into consideration, things like phishing simulation, penetration testing, and on the extreme side, social engineering to understand user risk and really where training and remediation needs to take place inside of your organization to prevent larger business risk.
And we have one more. How can we determine if a server needs to be upgraded?
Typically, we go by the age of the server to determine whether it needs to be upgraded or not, because it's a pretty straightforward way to determine whether that server is probably running on outdated equipment and has a high likelihood of failing in the near future. With server infrastructure, we're typically looking at the warranty from the manufacturer and the actual operating systems that run underneath. Because if that operating system is no longer supported, you're setting yourself up for costly downtime and security threats because there's no support on the back end to resolve an issue that you see.
Wonderful. And give me 1 minute as I take back the screen. Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric, for your informative presentation and for taking the time to be here today. For more information on Managed Cloud Services, check out our website at swktech.com and click on Managed Cloud Services under the Services tab. Thank you everyone for attending our webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day.